Shadows of Doubt is a game about solving crimes to protect innocent civilians from violent criminals. However, it has one major problem. You see, in my dozens of hours playing this game, I've given numerous innocent people brain damage as a result of my sloppy detective work. That's not the problem though. In fact, I kind of like that part. The problem is that when I do eventually catch the killer, another one simply takes his place. This cycle of crime makes me feel like no matter how many people I hospitalize, it's just not enough. So what I'm searching for is a solution. A way to prevent all criminal activity and achieve a utopian 0% homicide rate. And as far as I can tell, there's only one way to accomplish that. I need to arrest everyone in the entire city for their own safety. If all 700 citizens are firmly handcuffed to my basement radiator, then they won't have the ability to break the law, and I will have created the safest city in the entire world. There's only one issue. The developers anticipated my vision of an Orwellian future, and they limited the amount of time someone can be handcuffed to 2 hours. But if a little red tape was all it took to stop innovation, then we wouldn't have lobotomized all those schizophrenics in the 1950s. So I commissioned a mod that allows me to change this time limit from 2 hours to 20,000 hours, meaning that we can now detain the population indefinitely. Can I successfully create the perfect society, or will the corrupt and insidious police department try to stop me yet again? There's only one way to tell. But first, a word from our sponsor. Have you ever wanted to explore Chernobyl's nuclear exclusion zone? Maybe breathe in a few hundred sieverts of radiation while getting beaten to death by savage mutants? That was theoretical. I already know you do. Which is good, because the sponsor of today's video is StarCraft X, an open-world multiplayer survival FPS, and it's completely free. StarCraft X has recently added some new features, and I'm going to tell you about them whether you like it or not. For example, the game has a whole new storyline where you work with local factions to defend the northern territories from a new global threat. But if you prefer the sadistic pleasure of PvP, you can also participate in faction wars with your clan. Other than that, the game also has an upgraded loot system to allow for more viable scavenger playstyles. And you can even construct and customize your own personal shelter. Check out mine, pretty nice. Also, I can't forget, the graphics engine received a major overhaul. Now the game is practically indistinguishable from real life. Finally, StarCraft X is doing its part to contribute to the AI singularity, because they've upgraded their AI substantially, and I for one welcome our new robot overlords. Well, that about covers it. Try StarCraft X for free on PC, and if you follow my link in the pinned comment and enter code Reggie2024, you'll get all these starting supplies, including a pistol, a knife, and the souls of my enemies. Thank you, StarCraft X. Now, back to the video. Now, the first thing we need to do is generate a city. I did this about a dozen times to try and find a seed with the largest population, and coincidentally, it ended up being this one. After that, we make our character. I chose to be Korean for the racial passives, and then I start the game. The very first step toward enacting mass incarceration is creating a base of operations, optimally an apartment, but presently I am undeniably homeless. So I went ahead and did the only reasonable thing. I sold my body to a mega corporation for profit. You see, in this world there are cybernetic augmentations called sync disks that you can install into your brain. Most of them give you vaguely useful superpowers, such as the ability to convince homeless people that dryer lint is candy. Furthermore, if you go to a vending machine, you can get one of these powers, and not only is it free, but the Starch Cola Mega Corporation will even pay you $5,000 if you let them drill holes in your skull and install it. So I went ahead and did that. Admittedly, there were some side effects. For example, I now have a crippling addiction to Starch Cola products, and if I go longer than 90 seconds without drinking them, the room starts spinning like I'm in a fucking blender. Also, if I ingest anything other than high fructose corn syrup, I will literally die. So basically, I'm an American. But I won't let that prevent me from making a peaceful society. Now that we've got some money, we can go get ourselves an apartment and begin the process. Actually, no. We can't. As it turns out, the local Communist Party has decided that we don't deserve property rights, so we need to advance our social credit to level 2 before we can rent an apartment. To accomplish this, we're going to have to do some good deeds for the community. I started by looking at the job listings, and one in particular caught my eye. It reads, "Work available, business-related concerns require investigation." So I accepted the job and read through the mission details. Long story short, this man stole embarrassing photos of our client, and he's trying to blackmail him.
I did not have sexual relations with that man. I'm just kidding. I did.
So we need to get them back. Fortunately, I've already found out where he lives, and I am currently punching him in the head like 50 times. After our target slipped into the sweet embrace of a brain hemorrhage, I began ransacking his apartment in search of the photos. Unfortunately, he kept waking up, so I had to repeatedly knock him out with the business end of a tea kettle. In case you're wondering which end of a tea kettle is the business end, the answer is all of them, as long as I throw it hard enough. Anyway, I searched everywhere for the documents, but I couldn't find them. So I got frustrated and threw this guy's baseball trophy out the 7th floor window, probably killing an innocent pedestrian in the process. After that, I settled for stealing a roll of his duct tape and making my escape. That was a disaster, probably because I went to the wrong apartment. I was supposed to go to unit 403, but I accidentally went to 304 instead. After realizing my mistake, I went to 403, greeted the homeowner, stole the documents, and then destroyed them by tossing them into the government-owned synthetic ocean. After which, I found my payment waiting for me inside a P.O. box. I received enough social credit to hit level 1, along with $2,100 and a sync disk which increases our inventory capacity. Very nice. Speaking of sync disks, while I was searching for those documents, I came across a couple disks in a safe, one of which gives me the greatest superpower of all: insurance fraud. After installing the Spartan insurance disc, I no longer pay medical bills, but even better than that, whenever I suffer an accidental injury, my insurance company will pay me $300. Obviously, I had to test this, so I found the nearest elevator, took it to the top floor of a skyscraper, and launched myself off the roof. I awoke 12 hours later and $300 richer. After this, I had suddenly, and without explanation, become the clumsiest man alive, accidentally falling out of windows all over town, only to wake up in the hospital and fall out of the windows there too. Eventually, the hospital had to stop treating me on the 4th floor, at which point this technique became far less efficient. That was a lot of fun and quite lucrative, but hurling yourself out of a 14th floor window isn't exactly a good way to generate social credit, and we still need one more level to be able to buy an apartment, so I begrudgingly set out to solve an active murder case. It went a little like this. I got a call about some murders. The killer sliced up his victims with a box cutter. Truly gruesome. But the good news is he forgot to take the $86 this woman had in her pocket. This was a mistake that I would never make, so I immediately ruled myself out as a suspect. The only link between these people was the office they worked at, so I went there and spent all night committing $27,000 worth of corporate crimes in an attempt to gather evidence, but it wasn't fruitful, and as morning came around, I prepared to leave. However, on my way out, I bumped into this man, Fu Ma. He's the manager of the company, and he just casually admitted to seeing both of the victims at the crime scenes at the time and date of their death. I was somewhat taken aback by the fact that he just volunteered that information, so I decided to investigate him a little further. I broke into his apartment to gather evidence. However, his homosexual lover was guarding the refrigerator, so I broke his neck with a tea kettle. Not because he's gay, but because he has a weak neck. Long story short, I couldn't find anything incriminating, but I'm also a terrible detective, so I just decided to report Fu Ma to the police as a gamble. To my surprise, it worked, and he was the killer. Fumbling our way through this case got us up to social credit level 3, and we can now finally purchase an apartment. After a little hunting, I came across this. It's a real bargain, 36 square meters, and I get to live in a partially flooded basement. Fella, you've got yourself a deal. After moving in, I realize it's unfurnished, but we can fix that. The first piece of furniture I buy is a weapons locker, because we're going to be using this space as an armory to stockpile the necessary resources for the final solution. Following that, I purchased a bed so I could get some much needed rest. However, this was a terrible decision, because I'm still severely addicted to starch cola, and for each hour I went without it, my symptoms intensified. By the time I woke up, my motor skills had been replaced with a supernatural ability to involuntarily rotate my head like a fucking Beyblade. The worst part is that I had a can of soda right next to the bed, but the shaking was so bad it took me about 4 minutes just to be able to pick it up. This is what we in the business call rock bottom. Following this, I decided it was time to remove the starch cola brain chip. However, arriving at the clinic, I see that the Cola Corporation is refusing to uninstall it unless I pay them $6,000. Yes, a soda company is holding my central nervous system hostage for ransom money. What a time to be alive. Anyway, I paid the cost and got on with my day. It's now time for our plan to enter Phase 2. According to the game, there are 650 people in the city, and at a cost of $25 per handcuff, we're going to need 16,000 20,000 if we want to arrest the entire population. Then we have to add in the cost of buying other apartments, food, water, and before long we could be looking at 30,000. Currently we're at 8,000, which means it's time for a little fundraising. My first attempt at this involved picking up trash and recycling it for $2 each. I did that for about 30 seconds before realizing I'd have to recycle 11,000 used condoms just to reach our goal. And that's exactly when I decided recycling is for pussies. While that was happening, another murderer had already started killing, meaning that the longer it takes me to make this money, the more people will die. So I've decided to give myself some moral clearance to fundraise using less conventional methods. I started in my apartment building. I'd go to each person's door and ask them to pay the protection tax. If they said yes, that would be the end of it. But if they said no, I'd come back around 2 in the morning wearing a Richard Nixon mask, break into their home, and acquire their donations personally. The residents really don't like this, but they couldn't stop me, because by this point I had fully evolved into a ventilation gremlin, worming my way into even the most secure locations. And children, if you hear the ventilation gremlin in your apartment late at night, don't wake up, because then I'll have to put you back to sleep. From there, I simply take the loot to the nearest pawn shop. I like this place because they'll buy almost anything, and they never ask me why the items are covered in human blood. The bad news though is that the people in my apartment building are just as poor as me, and they don't have many valuables, meaning that I spent all night stealing a coffee mug, 2 pencil sharpeners, a baseball, and a wedding ring for a grand total of like $400. This was terribly disappointing. However, in better news, I found out that I could distract the store clerk by throwing coins across the room, and when they go to pick them up, I can jump the counter and steal their entire inventory before selling it back to them. That was fun, but I think it's time to refine my strategy and pivot to a more affluent demographic. Peasants like you and me live in the basement of run-down apartment buildings. Normal people live on floors 2 to 10, but the truly wealthy in our society live at the top of skyscrapers in an area called the Echelon Zone. You can tell they're really wealthy because they have an entire purple force field to remind us that we do not belong. But everyone needs air conditioning, and if you've got vents, you better believe I'm actively crawling my way toward you. So I started breaking into rich people's homes and collecting some overdue taxes. This made a pretty big difference, because it's not uncommon to find several diamonds in a single apartment. The downside to this was that some people are so rich they don't even have jobs, which means they're home all day. And since I'm trying not to be violent, this resulted in me spending a lot of time hiding from them in unusual places. One time, I spent all night in a kitchen cupboard, and I have to say, being stuffed in a pantry and forced to listen to a married couple arguing about groceries for 8 hours does something to a man. In my case, it made me reconsider my no violence policy. From this point onward, I felt morally correct using human blood to lubricate the wheels of justice. And I know it looks bad, but this entire process is non-lethal. Well, except for this guy. I hit him too hard with a frying pan and he's dead. This made me realize that crushing people's skulls with cast iron pans was too unpredictable. So I ran to the nearest pawn shop and purchased myself a cavalry saber. Really, they should call it a time saver, because once I started using this bad boy, I was able to speedrun entire apartments in 20 seconds tops. Speaking of which, I was in the middle of looting this guy's house when I cracked his safe and found a very interesting sync disk. It's called the Ambassador Scheme. If I slot it in, it gives me the ability to install keyloggers on people's computers. And the best part, it pays as much as $140 per computer. This got me thinking, where in the city would have the highest density of PCs? Obviously, it's the office buildings. And so began my war on corporate America. But if I'm going to take on an entire office, I'm going to need to be well supplied. So I found my target, picked up 8 pairs of handcuffs, pulled out my sword, and then spent a few minutes hyping myself up in the reception area. Then I just went for it. My technique was to speedrun the entire workplace, knocking everyone out before they could pull the alarm. Following this, I break into the fuse box and disable the cameras before handcuffing everyone for their own safety. What am I protecting them from? Myself. Because sometimes I run out of handcuffs, at which point I am forced to cull the herd. Following this, I loot every desk and vault for valuables. After that, I install Chinese bloatware on the PCs and make my escape. This was a pretty good system, and I was making a lot of money, but I did run into some problems, because other offices started hearing about my crusade, and they didn't like it. Sometimes I'd pass office workers in the hallway, and they'd recognize me as that domestic terrorist guy, at which point they'd form a violent mob and chase me out of the building. They think they're stopping me, but fury will be met with fury. So for my own protection, I had to start carrying flashbang grenades just in case I got mobbed. And you know what the real cost of that is? No, it's not the $85. It's the fact that I now have one less handcuff in my inventory. After that, it was smooth sailing. I even wound up in a hostage situation where I got pinned down in the manager's office with 2 captives. The security turret wants to shoot me, but it can't. So instead, it settled for absolutely massacring the manager and his secretary. Anyway, this corporate war lasted about 4 days, and I crippled a lot of legitimate businesses in the process. But by the end of it, I had finally accumulated $17,000. Now, it's time for us to stock up on some handcuffs. I made my way back to the apartment and began the long and arduous process of buying 650 handcuffs and placing them in a pile in my bedroom. It started small, but over time our mound of cuffs grew into a mighty mountain, a symbol of justice for the entire city. I call him Ryan. Sometimes Ryan speaks to me. Tells me to do things. Terrible things. Arrest women and children. Finally, someone who understands me. Let's get to work, Ryan. If we're going to arrest everyone in the city, we may as well start with our own apartment building. Currently, we have the basement all to ourselves, but there's 9 other floors that we'll need to secure. And so it began. I started my takeover by unscrewing all the light bulbs in the entire building. Then, in the confusion, I picked up a fire extinguisher and started knocking on some doors. If you answered, you probably wouldn't remember, because the first thing I did was bounce this extinguisher off your head and handcuff your unconscious body. Then I'd rifle through your personal documents to determine how many people live at this address. Occasionally I'd miss someone because they were working the night shift, but when they came home the next morning, they'd find me sitting in their living room waiting for them with a heavily dented fire extinguisher. This was a pretty small building, so it only took me around an hour to secure all of the inhabitants, meaning that this entire apartment complex is now under our protection, and gangland culture clearly asserts that demarcating your territory through violence is a necessity. So I went out on the streets and started savagely attacking anyone that walked in front of my block. I also experimented with using roadside bombs to achieve a similar effect, but I blew myself up like 5 times in a row. So I had to settle for just throwing the bombs into large crowds of people and detaining everyone that survived. All of this was taking place in the Chinese district right next to my apartment building. The papers were referring to it as the Chinatown Massacre, but don't be mistaken, the people were fighting back. They don't realize I'm doing this for their own safety, and sometimes they shoot me in the face with rifles. But thanks to my infinite healthcare policy, I just wake up at the hospital with an additional $300 to spend on more explosives. I need this city to understand that I am an unstoppable force for good. In total, I arrested about 60 people, which is great because now they can collectively develop hypothermia as a group activity. After all of that, I decided it was time to colonize a new apartment building. So I went to the bar, found an ad, and bought myself a new unit. It's in Boss View, a 19-floor skyscraper, and taking it over won't be easy. I tried my usual approach of blunt force trauma, but there was so much foot traffic in this building that running into random vigilantes was unavoidable. And as fun as it is to get blown away by a hunting rifle, I couldn't afford the time off, so I had to start using the security shutters to lock down my hunting grounds and limit the amount of interference. Once I started doing that, we were back on track, and I quickly cleared out all of the apartments up to the 11th floor, which marks the beginning of the Echelon Zone. My plan remained relatively unchanged. However, the Echelon Zone has far more security, and most of the apartments have their own surveillance cameras and automated turrets, meaning that one moment you could be rummaging through some cupboards looking for spare food, and the next you're getting shot in the side of the head by a Coca-Cola brand home security system. I remedied this issue by carrying ballistic armor. It reduces damage from bullets and also doubles as a viable weapon in self-defense situations. With my vital organs now mostly protected, I was able to clear out the Echelon Zone fairly uneventfully. The only notable occurrence was when I broke into an apartment only to find one of the inhabitants, a fat Asian man, already handcuffed to his bed, with his wife casually walking down the hallway. I don't know exactly what I walked in on, but I do know this man's submissive lifestyle just saved me $25. And with that, apartment 2 is secure, meaning we now control 2 out of the city's 12 apartment complexes. Unfortunately, most of my clients aren't being dominated by their wives, so I had to spend a lot of money on handcuffs. And now we can't afford our next apartment. apartment. So it's back to fundraising for us. My first intuition was to go to Chinatown, where approximately 70 people were practically begging me to steal their wallets. Sadly, these people have the collective wealth of a singular Lithuanian coal miner, meaning that it's just not worth my time to rob them. So instead, I resorted to vandalism. This man lost millions in an NFT rug pull, and now he's willing to pay me to destroy the scammer's apartment as revenge. The only thing we know about our target is that they're a head chef and their name starts with the letter L. So I had no choice but to go to every restaurant in town, kick their door in, cause immense violence, and then pensively review their employee board for a chef whose name starts with the letter L. At first, I felt kind of bad about all of this, but eventually I assumed a persona. I started calling myself the health inspector, and it made me feel a lot better when I was smashing a sous chef's head off the countertop to try and extract information from him. After ruining about 9 different Chinese restaurants, I finally had a lead. Liko Zhang, head chef of the Daffodil restaurant and the only person that fits our description. After finding out where she lives, I showed up at her apartment with an offer she can't refuse. I quickly dispatched her roommate and folded Liko like a lawn chair, at which point I began my vandalism. We need to cause $750 worth of damage, so I started by breaking everything I could and throwing the rest of it out the window. Coffee mugs, hearing aids, and ergonomically adjusted chairs, it all had to go. After a few minutes, Liko woke up and pulled the security alarm, so I snapped a picture of the crime and made my escape. Completing this quest awarded us with $1,000, which allowed me to secure our next accommodations, a room at the Steiner Hotel. I cleared about half of the hotel, and I'll be honest, it was very easy. So I decided to find a bottle of vodka and drink it until I couldn't stand up straight. This complicated my mission significantly. All I remember from that point on was going to the roof and spinning uncontrollably, before stumbling my way into the kitchen, where I spent 17 minutes trying to arrest a line cook who was doing an excellent job at ignoring me. Then at one point I'm pretty sure I fell down an elevator shaft. I don't know if there's a lesson to be learned from all of that, but I do know that any day now my insurance company is going to have to file for bankruptcy. Anyway, on to the next building. I secured us a room in Caldwell View, an 18-story apartment complex. I won't lie, I kind of enjoyed the challenge of arresting dozens of people while pissing my pants, so I adopted a challenge for this building as well. Instead of using my katana, I'm only allowed to pacify my clients with the random items I find inside of their apartments. This seemingly mundane rule altered the challenge significantly, because now the safest way to arrest people is to wait until they fall asleep, at which point you can shatter a ceramic vase over their head and handcuff them to the bed frame. But that takes a lot of time, and I prefer the thrill of the chase, so I typically knock on a door, wait for the resident to open it, then I rush inside, which gives us exactly 10 seconds to find a weapon before the homeowner starts stabbing me to death with a dinner knife. Do this enough and you will develop an extensive mental spreadsheet of which items can and cannot give someone brain damage. 50 concussions and countless stab wounds later, we had finally arrested the entire population of the building. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that there have been no murders for the past 3 days, which means one of two things. Either A, we got lucky and already arrested the murderer, or B, we arrested the murderer's next victim, and he has been patiently waiting for them in their apartment all week. Meanwhile, they're probably drinking from a puddle in the middle of Chinatown. It's unlikely, but I can't take that risk. So we're moving on to the next target, the Big 7. 7 huge residential buildings absolutely full of potential murderers. Clearing this out is going to take forever, and forcing 400 people into a vegetative state isn't nearly as exciting as it sounds. So in the interest of time, I offer to you a montage.
I'm a human, and I'm coming.
What the fuck? I know all of that looked pretty bad, but I want to convince you that I am the real victim here, because that took over 10 hours and it caused me to develop an addiction to drinking perfume and overdosing on insulin as a coping mechanism. Regardless, it's finally over. Now we can move on to the next stage in our war on crime, which is disabling the economy. I estimate that I've arrested about 90% of the city's population. However, I believe another 5% may be holed out at various restaurants and factories around town, so it's time for the health inspector to shut them down permanently. Fortunately, I've already got a bit of work done in this regard. For example, earlier in the game, I entered some kind of a fugue state and arrested 27 people in the Velvet Street Burger Shack. I legitimately do not remember doing this. Also, this diner in Chinatown has a literal conga line of people leading all the way to the payphone, because they kept trying to call the cops on me. But now, things are much quieter. I spent a few hours visiting every shop in town. Occasionally, I'd stumble upon a small pocket of resistance fighters which I would immediately secure, but most of the time it was a complete ghost town. We are rapidly approaching 100% utopia, but one faction of rebels has managed to evade me so far, a breed of human which has dedicated its entire existence to antisocial behavior. They do not need to work, and they don't even have an apartment. They are the homeless. Since they don't have a fixed address, it's quite difficult to track them down. They'll spend their nights sleeping anywhere, inside of lobster traps or washing machines. Nowhere is off limits to them. So to find them, I've enlisted the help of a willing volunteer. I microchipped this homeless man's testicles, and when he wakes up, I'm going to be able to track his movements throughout town. Hopefully, he'll lead us right to his friends. I tried this out, and after following him through several alleys covered in human waste, he finally took me to the homeless headquarters. It's a dangerous place with no laws. In fact, you can get a syringe full of feces for as little as $25. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to save the world. I started by detaining as many vagrants as I could. They decided to thank me by pummeling me with a baseball bat. I have to say, beating and arresting the homeless for 2 hours is a lot of work, and it's given me a newfound respect for the police. After taking down the 2 largest homeless camps, I estimate that there are about 10 people we haven't got yet, and there's only one place they could be hiding out: City Hall. The City Hall is a multi-story government building which houses a clerical staff, the entire hospital, and most dangerous of all, the police department. Capturing this could prove to be our greatest challenge yet, so I spared no expense. Bulletproof vests, frag grenades, flashbangs, and of course, handcuffs. I was prepared to liberate this city from its own violence, or die trying. So I marched down to City Hall, kicked in the door, and realized that the entire building was being protected by a single man. Slightly disappointing. However, I'm not one to waste a good grenade, so I flashbanged him until he stopped moving. With his arrest, we are now in the end game. Theoretically, everyone in the entire city has been arrested, including the murderer, but maybe that's exactly what they want us to think. Maybe the criminal is still out there, evading capture by eating out of dumpsters and sleeping in ventilation ducts. I can't take that risk, so I'm going to arrest the very city itself. That's right, we're putting this place under lockdown. I went to the weapons locker and purchased about 100 Bloodhound tracking chips. We can place these on the walls as a sort of laser tripwire. If anyone walks past them, it will send me a notification telling the location and build of the offending person. So I took a few hours and distributed these to every intersection, apartment building, and public toilet across the city. If a single ass is shitting in this town, we're gonna know about it. Then, to complement this tactic, I went to the sink clinic and installed the stability upgrade. This one removes fall damage, which means I can now perch myself on the roof of an 18-story building and watch over the entire city. Then, if I detect any movement whatsoever, I deploy myself from the rooftop like an orbital drop pod, smashing into the ground at 36,000 meters per second before immediately dropping to all fours and pursuing my target. The rush of endorphins I received from chasing an elderly woman down an alleyway is most closely comparable to a generous dose of Chinese heroin. Anyway, after doing this all day, I managed to capture 2 new people, and it's been weeks since I've received any notifications. Given all of this, I am finally confident in saying that we have arrested the murderer. To celebrate, I decided to take a stroll down Chinatown and listen to the harmonious symphony of gratitude bellowing from my fellow citizens.
Don't hit me. Where am I? What happened? Please don't hit me.
Ah, music to my ears. You see, all my hard work has turned me into something of a celebrity around town. And everywhere I go, people ask me questions like, "Who are you?" and "Please don't hurt me." Honestly, I never know the answer. But I do know there's still one thing that's bothering me. The problem is that when I do eventually catch the killer, another one simply takes his place. If it's true that arresting a serial killer just causes another one to take his place, then over time every single person, every man, woman, and child will become a murderer. That's right, they're all bloodthirsty killers just waiting to be passed the baton in this sick relay race we call life. So I'm going ahead and putting all of them on trial for thought crimes against the state. And since I've already arrested all government employees, I have no choice but to serve as a judge, jury, and executioner. Citizens of fascist Germany, I hereby find you guilty of the conspiracy to commit murder. Your punishment is death.
Yeah, cause I'm the hunter, not the hunting. And for an enemy, I guarantee that they don't want me. It's something just a little different by how I run things. Maybe it's the way I turn my enemies to lunch meat. Or maybe it's the way I smash everything in front of me. They don't want it, I do it so easy, it's funny, G. I turn a vet into a wannabe and do it to the death. I put them in their final scene. Hey.
Well, it's finally over. Now I can rest easy knowing that the city is safe once and for all. But as I returned to my dilapidated apartment and surrendered myself to a flea-infested mattress, there was just one thing I couldn't get off my mind. If killing the murderer causes another citizen to take their place, and I've killed everyone in town, meaning that I'm the only citizen left, then logically, I am now the murderer. And I think I know my next victim. Well, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you again to Stallcraft for sponsoring the video, my patrons for supporting the channel, and finally, thank you for watching.